Right, so then we have the whole sky system, and I'm actually going to release part of my sky for free to the community, so you can also check this out yourself. But the entire sky is one giant blueprint. I built everything real life size, not entirely real life obviously, but point being, it's big. It's really big. You can see here in side view, the level is here, so this is basically the level. You can see the volumes, the level is basically within those boxes here. You can see this is the entire grid, so this is the max grid. This is about 500,000 units across or something, I believe. What is it? Yeah, 500 something, 550 or something. So you can see the sky is even bigger than that, and there is actually a planet here. So this is a planet. That planet is like 300,000-400,000 units across, and it moves through the sky. The entire sky is one big blueprint. So I can easily start any level, make a new level, for example, drag in my blueprint from the sky, and I would instantly have the entire sky and day and night and everything else set up. I can show you that in here. Let me open the blueprint. So here's a blueprint used for the sky. See, in the components I added everything I need, all the different meshes. So that's the surrounding sky dome. So the surrounding sky dome goes blue during the day, and during the night it fades in stars. Then we have this cloud layer underneath. That cloud layer will blend away the sky behind it if it's very cloudy. So basically, like in real life, there's clouds underneath the upper atmosphere, or whatever you want to call it. And then the planets actually move in between those two, in between the starry background and the cloud layer in front. All of that has been animated and set up in Blueprint. You can see here's my whole setup. It's rather large. I could have done this a little bit more clean, I could have organized it a bit more, but to me visual scripting also means that it's visual, that I have to be able to see what it does. If I organize this more using functions and macros and more organization, more custom events, etc., then it's more difficult for me and for people new to the engine to actually see what it does. Now you can visually see, this goes there. The moment you start splitting it up in different parts, you can't visually see anymore that this connects to that. So I also did it for that reason, but still I probably could have cleaned it up a bit more. Either way, I can briefly show you how I do it. This I'll show you later on, but the majority of it is simply done on beginning of the game, on begin play. I split up the signal because I have to do several different things at the same time. But the majority of it is run by a timeline. A timeline is basically like a matinee for variables. Okay, so matinee being recognizable for people coming from Unreal Engine 3, it simply animates numbers. It's a curve editor. So I have a very simple, over 60 seconds long, it will go from 0 to 1. That's it. That's my entire day. I have a second one here for the moon. So the moon length is longer than the day length, so I have a second curve for that. I set that so I can easily access it later. Then I made a macro that splits it up. So basically what I do is I make this 0 to 1, actually 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. I start splitting it in different parts, so it's 0 to 1 for every part of the day. So the morning is 0 to 1, from noon to evening is 0 to 1, from evening to midnight is 0 to 1, etc. That way I don't need multiple timelines, I can just use a single timeline and then just recalculate that number. Again, long lines here, I could have done it better. But point being, it splits up then in very early morning, normal early morning, morning to noon, noon to evening, evening itself, very late evening, so the transition between evening, so the point of sunset basically here, and then nighttime atmosphere. This is before midnight, and the second arm is after midnight. The sky is actually very simple. You can look at this yourself when I release it, but it's actually a very simple setup. It just looks overwhelming because it's so much. But in reality, all it really is just a long set of set this, set that, set the next thing, that's it. So set the color of the fog, set the color of ambient day, set the color of that, pass it on to the time, same there. So it's really quite straightforward. This is the long list of sets. That's all it really does. And that's how it blends in. So you can see here in the morning, I made a function to try to group it together a bit more. But one of these is the sunlight. So in the morning, he goes from sunlight brightness 0 to 4. That's it. That's how the sun fades in. and he changes color. The sun gets a bit warmer colored later on in the day. So that's quite straightforward. I made my own processing system, I'll show that later on. And I also have temperature control. So in the game, not only do I have a day and night cycle, not only do I have a fully dynamic weather cycle, I also have temperature control, humidity, wind, etc. So the game actually automatically generates a wind speed for a certain time of the day. It tracks the humidity of the world. It sets the world temperature, so it goes from -40°C in the night to like 60°C during the day. So we have temperature extremes in the game, and all of that is handled through blueprints. It should be noted that in the entire game there's not a single bit of coding. There is no C++ at all, at least not in this version. Everything is blueprints. And while we're now moving into blueprint, let me actually quickly show you what the game can do and what I've managed to pull off without a single bit of coding. So first of all, you have the temperature of the world. You can see you're holding this pocket computer thing. It says the body is 37°C, which is normal. There is calories underneath the body. I'm looking at the bottom left now. So health on top, then 37, then 59 calories now. That's the amount of calories you need. And then there's water, 0.1 liters of water needed. Then the column on the right, that's the amount of time you haven't slept. So if that reaches like 20 hours or so, it's going to be quite bad for you. Then the world temperature is underneath. It's currently 39°C in the world here. It's evening, but there is still sun, so it's still quite warm. And it's 21% humid, and the wind is 2.2 meters a second. You can see, if you look at the foliage, it doesn't move that much, so there's little wind. If I move into the shadows, you can see the world temperature drops to 23 degrees. So it's 23 degrees in the shadow. Also the wind, not in this version, but the wind will actually drop in the current version as well if you're standing behind an object. So if you're standing behind something big enough to break the wind, there is actually less wind as well. Then we have an item system working. So there's items laying around in the world. Here we have a pipe. If you look at the pipe, it says so on the PDA. It also says what kind of benefit it gives you. It doesn't give you any benefit right out. I mean, a pipe doesn't give any benefit, but for example, a can of food says it's a can of food and it will give you 1,500 calories and 0.2 liters of water. You can pick those things up, then you carry them. Here's a bottle of water. And let's just pick everything up. So I have a way of picking up items. You can carry the items, you can drop the item again. There we go, we dropped it. You can pick it up again. I can change them, so I have a basic inventory system working as well. So I can change between the pipe and the water bottle and everything I need. I can drink the water bottle, so you can see the pocket computer says I need 0.8 liters of water. If I click, I drink, now I need 0, because I just gained health. Or not health, but water. Now I have an empty bottle, I can throw that. I can do crafting as well, I can combine items. It's still quite simple right now, we're working on extending it. But if, for example, the can of food I need to smash open, so I'll use my pipe to smash it open. When items can be combined or otherwise used together, this little thing shows up, which is the attachment point. If you have the attachment point, you can then highlight that, click it, and then it modifies the one on the ground. And now you have a can that's open, which I can then eat. Likewise with things in the environment, if I actually take the bottle back that I just threw away, there's the bottle again. And then what I can do is I can fill the bottle with oil. There's this thing with oil here. That too becomes interactive and I can fill the bottle with oil. Now I'm holding a bottle with oil, etc. Also I'm offsetting the temperature. So you can see the world here is 39 degrees. If I walk towards the rocket flame here, the temperature goes quite high up and the computer starts to freak out from the temperature. I have various other forms of offsets as well, and a lot of other things. So all of those things, the entire functionality of the game is done with no coding whatsoever. You can also see I start taking damage now because it's too warm and I've been standing in the heat for too long. So blood starts to appear on the screen. Also the edges of the screen are red, etc. Again, nothing of this, absolutely nothing, is done in code. I can show you the sky system as well. So let me speed up the sky some and turn off random weather, or restricted weather rather. Play again. Actually, let me speed it up a lot more so it's very clear what it does. You can see now it's going to be night. So I've sped up the sky a lot. Also there is tide, so I have a working tide system. The tide is tied to the position of the big moon, so when the big moon is on that side of the ocean, the water gets attracted to it, therefore the tide is low. If that big moon moves over to the other side of the world, over there, then the tide will be high. Also you're breathing cold air. It's not entirely final yet, but you're actually breathing cold air. You can see the side of the screen starts to freeze as well, because it's night. Actually, I think a thunderstorm is moving in. It's not the best thing to show during the night, but actually even the flowers, they close during the night. So if you were to look at this during the day, the flowers would open. But in any case, the rain seems to be kicking in. The plants start to move faster. There's more wind, and we're getting a hurricane. So it's the same thing as the SGA video. Apparently, the hurricane spawned as well. None of these things are entirely finished, so I'm still very much so working on everything. But again, it does show what you can do with just Blueprint and what you can do with Unreal Engine 4. You can just spawn these kind of things. I made an entire tornado twister thing spawning in the world and moving towards me. Now because I sped up the sky so much, it's kind of messed up. It doesn't work that well, but I think it's gonna go right next to me. It's not entirely finished. So it doesn't work that well because it should have been gone by now. And it should have still rained, which I kind of messed up, but you can see how it works. So again, you can take a look at Blueprint. Now you have a bit of a better understanding of how all of that has been set up. The temperature is quite simple. The way I've done the temperature actually is it's easy to detect what kind of physics volume you're in. In Blueprint, you have a standard way of detecting the physics volume. So because of that, because you can do player pawn, I believe, get player pawn, so get the player. And also the game is quite easy to do in Blueprint because it's not multiplayer. To do all of this in multiplayer, that would be really, really complicated. So it's very good at single player. But then you can do get physics volume, if I remember correct. Somehow I might need to get the player control. I forgot exactly how I did it, but sorry, I should not do that like there. It's context sensitive. Nope, I actually forgot where it is. And anyhow, you can actually find the physics volume the player is in. So I made a child actor of a physics volume, and I called it the Solus atmosphere volume. And in that Solus atmosphere volume, I didn't do anything more but just define a number of variables. You can see them here. I just added these variables. There is no other code. So this I actually did do in C++, but I did nothing more but adding a bunch of variables. Temperature, humidity, wind, and water. That's it. The player then checks what volume he's in and then takes over the values from the volume he's in. So therefore the player knows he's standing outside and the temperature outside is 60 degrees, for example, or 25 in this case. The sky then detects that volume as well, and the sky will then update this volume all the time. Because the sky then updates that volume all the time, it makes the temperature change depend on the time of the day, and because the player reads that temperature from the volume, the player knows what the temperature is. You can see this is where I do it in the sky. So the signal comes in here, and then I set the current temperature. You can see it's passed on to the atmosphere volume here with the current temperature. You can see how I do the whole calculation here. It's a bit of a calculation. At the beginning of the day, when the temperature is 0, so I use 0 as a reset point, I will figure out what the current maximum temperature is. So I'll take the current maximum temperature, and then I will blend from that to the next one. So actually what I do, the maximum temperature is random per day to make sure that not every day has the same temperature. Then I divide by a lot, by 8, in the morning, because in the morning it's colder, so you don't want, if the maximum temperature is 60 degrees, you don't want to start the day with 60 degrees, obviously. So I start the day with maximum divided by 8, and during the course of the early morning, I go from divided by 8 to divided by 2. So the day is starting to warm up. That gets blended. There is another weather temperature multiplier. So for example, if it's raining, it shouldn't be that warm. If it's cloudy, it shouldn't be that warm either. This checks if you're standing in the sun. So this is what actually makes the standing in the shadows or in the sun part work, etc. Then we blend it together based on the animation that blends them together. And that eventually becomes the final texture. These kind of things, this one and also probably that one and that one, etc. They're set in other parts through. So for example, the weather sets it as well. Not sure if it's somewhere here. See, the weather sets it here as well. So if the skies are clear, it will blend towards 1.25. Therefore, it becomes even warmer because it's clear skies. The shadow detection, furthermore, is done mostly here. I think it's here actually. Very simple setup. It's basically this, but it's basically just a trace. So I trace from the player towards the sun. If the trace hits something, then I stand in the shadow. If it doesn't hit something, I stand in the sunlight. That's it. And if I stand in the shadows, then I begin an animation that fades it out, so it blends the number out. Therefore, it gets progressively colder. The number nicely blends from one value to the next, all done with timelines. This generates the wind and controls the wind, generates and controls the humidity. Position of the moon, and the position of all the moons and the sun and everything else is very simple, because all I really do is I just do a lerp and blend between two rotational values based on the time of the day. And then I do set relative rotation. That's it. I do that twice. This is for the day. I think this is for the night or so, in 2 parts. But that's it. I simply rotate it like that. That's the entire rotation. And I do the same with the sun. And with the sun particles, the sun lens flares, those kind of things. I have a system here that checks if new weather should be calculated. So this just basically loops around. And every time it loops around and there's no weather active, it will randomly, you can see it there, pick a weather type and then activate that weather type. That weather type will then retrieve the values from the sky right now. So it retrieves the current values. These are all material values. And then it will begin to blend in. This is a simple blend in and blend out. And then it will set all those values again. But it will blend from the current value to a new value and back, because the curve goes back as well. So I mean, it's quite a complex system to explain briefly in this video, but at the same time it's also a simple system because it's all really the same. It looks impressively large, but it's really the same thing over and over and over again. I can show you the player as well. So the player is able to detect things and pick things up. So what I did was I have my player here. And again, I'll be releasing part of my player for free, and other than that, in future tutorials and videos, I'll be going more in depth how I did more specific things. But this is the part, for example, where he checks if an item is in front of you. So he does 2 traces. One trace is for the item, one trace is for the attachment point, the little diamond. He does this coming from the first person camera, from the camera itself, then forward vector, multiplied. So this is a point about 300 units in front of the camera. So the 300 units is therefore also the maximum range of the detect item thing. If the item is more than 300 units away, it wouldn't detect it. He does some calculation there, then he traces, and then he checks if the trace hits something, and if the actor it hit is belonging to the class used for items. Because if it's not, then he hits something else. If it is, then he hits the right thing. If he hit the right thing, it continues. Then I should probably check. The PDA then gets told that you're currently looking at an item. The system here is going to remember what is currently in view, and then on the thing currently in view, we communicate to that item he should now highlight itself. Note that the highlight system is currently disabled, so you didn't see it in action, but I'm working on that. So then the item knows it should be highlighting it because it's currently in view. Then also the item should be told that and figure out if the items fit together. If the items fit together, then it should show the diamond, etc. Then when you left click, he needs to do a lot of different checks. For example, okay, you left click, but is there currently a cutscene active? Then you can't do anything. If true, don't do anything. You know, check if you're actually looking at an item in view, check if that is still part of the right class, etc. Check if you're using a flashlight right now, if you're using Chalk right now, if the item in front of you is attachable, etc. This is for merging things, this is when you grab it. So here's my whole inventory system as well. First of all, I need to know where to add it in the inventory. So this will find the next empty inventory spot. I currently have 8 inventory spots. So what he basically does is he takes the inventory array, he gets number 1 out of the array, and he compares, is that equal, or actually in this case, is it different from empty? Because he compares it with an empty object. If true, then it means there is something there. If false, it means there is nothing there, etc. So that's how he checks, how he finds the next one. So he goes through the whole line until he finds an empty spot. Also check if the inventory is not yet full, those kind of things. This is when he has to find the next empty inventory spot when he actually adds the item. Then he sets that part of that number, that index in the inventory to the item you're picking up, which is still in view right now. Then you tell the item in view that has been grabbed. Also there is a hand animation, there's a socket there, so I need to attach it to the socket of the hand with the right rotation. Here it gets attached. I automatically hide it, etc. Here's when you switch items, when you scroll up and down, then it finds the next inventory slot that's currently occupied, and then it will switch to that one instead. So the entire system, these are by the way macros. So this is where he switches to the next spot, etc. So it's a lot of things. I can't really go into too much detail explaining all of this, but I have a lot of things going on back and forth. A lot of how you craft items together, how you get updates and benefits from the items, how the item tells you what it is and what kind of benefits it has, everything. I have an entire health system here, so you get, this is the health of the player. He keeps checking this all the time if it's not yet 0. If it is 0, it means you're dead. And if you're dead, then he's gonna, after 4 seconds, play a respawn sound. If you're dead, he's also gonna drop whatever you're holding. If you're dead, the HUD will be told you died, and the HUD itself will then start to fade out and hide the crosshair. He will also tell the player controller that input should no longer be allowed because the player is dead. We remember the fact that the player is dead. The PDA should be set invisible because you've died after all. That's the dead part. Then you have to respawn after a while. So this only continues if the player is currently dead, otherwise the respawn part is not active. We make sure it only happens once, otherwise it gets kind of messed up. In case you got killed by lightning, we reset that value. Then we wait 8 seconds because the HUD needs 8 seconds to finish what it's doing, all the fading in and fading out and all that. Then when we respawn, we make sure we destroy everything that's visible on the screen that was part of your death. So that means broken glass and blood and all that, because you should start with a clean slate. The HUD is told to start fading in again. The player controller is told to allow input again. Player is no longer dead, PDA is visible again. We respawn everything else that should be respawned. So we get 250 health back, etc. The body temperature get reset, the sleep, thirsting, you know, the amount of water you need, the amount of food you need, everything else gets reset as well. And we then teleport the player to the last checkpoint. That's it. This is when you take damage. Same thing, so depending on the type of damage you take, we do different things. We have a damage effect here, these are functions, and it does all of this. So depending on what happens, he will spawn particles on the camera. So he will spawn that, and then he attaches it to the first person camera. So in front of the camera you would then see broken glass. This is actually attached to the camera and right in front of it. Then we set the amount of particles he spawns based on the amount of damage applied. So the more damage is applied, the more glass would spawn. There's a glass breaking sound. We spawn blood, We attached it as well. There's a couple of other things here, etc. This thing handles the position of the PDA and of your hand. So if you jump, you would, for example, I think this is probably, or this is when you use it, for example, he plays a timeline which will blend between these two things. So it looks like you're animating your hand. This is basically the animation of the hand. Also, if you jump, it kind of wobbles up and down. Also, actually, I checked the field of view and how big the screen is, and based on the width of the screen, he will move the PDA and the item you're holding to different positions. So it's always on the edge of the screen. That is a macro, so he calculates it there. I made my own swimming actually in Blueprint. So the entire act of swimming is purely done in Blueprint. I first of all check, here you can see the physics volume. It was actually on the movement component, so that's why it didn't work earlier. But get movement component, get the physics volume, then this is the physics volume currently in. Then we check, is that physics volume water? If it is water, true, then we do that. Otherwise we just reset something. But if it is water, then we go there, splits up a bit. We set the movement mode to swimming, which is a standard character movement mode thing that standardly comes with the engine. We set a sound mix modifier, which makes the sounds sound like a low frequency pass or whatever, lower pitch. So it sounds as if you're underwater. This modifies all the sounds in the entire world. Then we play a timeline, and that timeline will make you get pulled down ever more. So we apply velocity to the player, to the character movement. And the longer you're in water, the more you will get pulled down. This gets progressively worse. And by doing so, the point of that is that if you get into water, you can get out if you're quick. But if you stay in water too long, you'll get pulled down and you will drown. Then also what we do down here, we fade in the water effect, which is done through post-processing. We'll get back to that later. And we enter drown state. Again, it's material stuff. This is the part where I actually start taking damage from drowning. So we receive damage, drowning state, etc. Every time we receive damage, we take 100 damage every time we try to breathe. There's a sound plate, and now you have some bubbles spawning around you, and then it starts over again. You have to sleep. The sleep must be interruptible. So for example, if you're sleeping on the beach and the tide rises, that should clearly interrupt you. If it gets extremely warm during the day, you should probably wake up. So all of this checks that and communicates it onwards. We have an indoor check, and this is a very good example of how we move functionality from Blueprint to C++. So right now all of this is C++, but it's a bit complex to do this, and it's a bit performance heavy perhaps. So we moved this one to C++, which I can show you later. But anyhow, we have a nearby trace check, and that basically traces. So I do 6 different traces around the player, and I check if none of them hit anything. If none of them hit anything, I'm standing outside or near an entrance at least, or an exit. However, first of all, I also check the location of the player. If the player is underneath -512, I'm definitely underground, and otherwise if all of these traces are true, then I'm also indoor. Falling damage. So when movement mode has changed to falling, that means I began falling. I remember when this happens, so this gives me this allows me to know when I began falling down. So I know from what height I began, and then when I landed, if falling damage is allowed, if we're not currently swimming, because that would be bad, then I calculate based on where I started and based on where I landed, and the distance between these two becomes the amount of damage applied if greater than a certain number. So that's that calculation. And then I apply damage. I lower it a bit, otherwise it's too extreme. And that's the falling damage you take. The player leaves footsteps behind. So again, I spawn 2 different footsteps, left foot, right foot. Every time you take a step, you have a sound playing. And this basically just loops around all the time. That's pretty much it, really. Local rain, so it rains around the player. Some other things here. The PDA is a separate actor, so the PDA is a completely separate actor, is this one. and it gets spawned and then attached to the player. I originally had it in the player, the same for all the stats and all the other calculations, but it became so very big that I was scared of breaking the whole system. So I began moving some of it out to separate actors, and then the player spawns that actor at the beginning of the game. You can see here on begin play, spawn actor Solus PDA player, which then gets attached to the actor, to the player, to the camera even, and then we remember that. That's it. This way I have split my functionality between different blueprints. The same for other things here. The stat system is what handles all the calculations like body temperature, if it's too warm, if you have to go to sleep, what you're currently eating. This also retrieves the values from the volume you're in, like what temperature it currently is. How does the item you're holding impact the temperature you're experiencing? For example, if you hold a torch during the night, you will feel warmer. And so on and so on. If you jump in water, it should feel colder because you're now wet. And so on. If you're standing near fire, it should be warmer. If you're standing near rocket flame, it should be warmer. If you're standing in a cave, it's probably a little bit warmer during the night, but colder during the day. And so on and so on. I also have a fair bit in the player controller. So this is the player controller. I do camera animations in the player controller. I have my controls in the player controller. And a couple of other smaller things. I have some debug controls also, which works quite well to test the game. If you're going to build a game, I advise you set up simple things like this. Every second saved while building the game is welcome. So these are my controls. Actions are defined in ini files. I always check if you're in cutscene mode and if input is allowed, otherwise it doesn't do anything. This switches between walking fast or walking slow. So sprint mode basically. Every time you press it, it toggles between, flip-flop. I have my own jumps thing here, and you can only jump if you're not in water, so check for that. Also when you jump, I also remember where you began jumping from in case you fall off a ledge or you jump down, then I have to know where you started out from for the falling damage. I have all of this. I also give the player a small impulse forward, so you jump a little bit further by applying velocity into the direction of which you're jumping, multiplied by 1.2. Actually, I take the current velocity of the player, multiply that, and I add it on top of the player. And we have a jump sound. I have my own ladder climbing system. That is, I think this one. Move forwards and move up acts differently if you're in ladder climbing mode or just walking on ground. See if you're climbing here. If true, it will do this instead, add movement mode this, etc. So I have a lot of blueprints. But it does show just how far you can go with blueprints. I made my entire game. I made temperature checks, I made a tide system, I made day and night, I made picking up items, combining items. For example, if I would want, I could craft a torch. Crafting a torch takes 5 steps, but it works. All of that with nothing more than blueprints. So it's really insane just how far you can push it. I can talk actually about the tide that I brought up earlier. So as I mentioned earlier, you can see it's a little bit darker here. So in the editor it doesn't update properly, but in game it does. What happens here is that if you were to look at the material for the ground, so this is the landscape material. It's very straightforward. It looks exactly like Unreal Engine 3 almost. It's just a bunch of layers above each other. That's it. But then I have this thing, which is the tide. So first of all, I color it by height. That's the same kind of system used as for the rocks in the caves. You know, the green rocks there. If you move the rock up, then the green actually stays in place. Well, that's simply this setup. It's a very straightforward setup. It checks the position in the world, and then it impacts the material based on that. I use that to make sure that the darkness is always on the same place. So even if I were to move the landscape, the darkness would always be here, the wet part. And then I have these two things, and these are material parameter collections. And I use them through the game everywhere. So a material parameter collection is basically like a normal parameter found in a material instance, but it's game-wide. It's like a bigger one. So if I go to, for example, general, where I have most of them. And this updates slowly in the beginning, so let me have it load. the material functions update very slowly in the content browser for some, at least in this version. So I have this thing here, for example, the main material parameter collection. This has most of the things I use. So it's nothing more but a long list of parameter of values, basically. You can see it's just a long list, nothing else happens here. I'm just defining the parameters. And let me find the tide, for example, as a good example. Here we have the tide position and the tide width. So you have two numbers here, and these two numbers then get passed on to the material. The sky in turn, or I'm not sure if it's the sky or another blueprint, but one of the blueprints in control of the environment, then update this value all the time based on the position of the surface of the ocean. Let me see if I can find it. I think it might actually be in this one. I have a second blueprint that handles animation and effect control. So for example, if there's a lot of wind, I'm actually speeding up the sound of the wind sounds in the level. So the wind sounds are just placed around through the level. I increase the pitch of them to match the increased speed of the wind. That's one of the things I do there, for example. That also, however, impacts the tide. I also have impact on the rain. It impacts the cave water as well. So here we have the tide. And you can see this one is updating the material parameter collection with the values from environment tide. And in fact, what I do in environment tide, it's coming from game state. I'm using the game state to store important information in. I'm not actually sure if that's actually the way to go. Again, I'm not a programmer, I'm a level designer, an artist, but that has been my way of approaching this. So there is a game state thing. You can see there's no blueprint at all in the game state, it's empty, but I've defined all the variables that are most critical to remember. So all the information I would basically save in a save game is saved in the game state. You can see the current position of the player, the last checkpoint position and rotation of the player, the body temperature of the player, hunger, thirst, sleep, everything that's important, including the tide somewhere here, is included there as well. Actually the tide, yeah, there, environment tide. And then the reason why I did that, because the game state is very easy to get to from anywhere in the game. If I would have made a new actor, for example, I made a PDA actor, right? I wouldn't be able to get the PDA. Can't really get to the PDA. I can't find the PDA, so if I can't find the PDA, I can't tell it what it should do. But the game state, and that's one thing I can always, everywhere, get. I can always do get game state. So I can always get to that information and write to that information wherever I want. So that's why I choose to put it in the game state. So the game state is remembering most important information. Anyhow, the material collections, they remember most of it. I also use material collections to make my own post-processing system. So when I started out building this, the post-processing system in Unreal Engine 4 was more simple. I didn't really have the control that I needed, so I began building my own. The current post-processing system is much better. So I could have technically done without doing what I've done, but I'm now going to stick to my own system. However, again, it does demonstrate what you can do if you would really want to. So in the post-processing system, we have a big volume covering the entire level here. That's a post-processing volume. First of all, I have a dirt mask. That's all the little spots you see on the screen when you look at the sun and all that. I have no depth of field. It doesn't really work well, I think, so I just turn it off. I have no motion blur. It doesn't seem to work well either for me. But most importantly, I have blendables here. So these are two post-processed materials blended on top. One of them is for general things, such as the dark edges on the screen and the parts of your visor showing up. For example, if you're drowning, the fact that your screen starts to distort from the water, anything that's major like that. And the other one is for outdoor post-processing, coloring. So here's the main one, got a little bit big. This is used for most normal things. So the fact that your screen, again, the fact that you have a visor on your screen, this is the visor, gets added onto the screen. Actually, it's missing here, something here. This is a bit of an older version. This handles the outline system, currently not fully implemented, but it gives a red outline around the object, like Left 4 Dead. This will distort the screen, so it distorts using a couple of cloud textures. This is the actual screen output, so this is what you see, and then everything else gets added on top, or lerped on top. This is when you go into I state. Again, the I state is material collection, using that texture, etc. We have one for heat, we have one for lightning hits, if you're in a tornado, if you're underwater, etc. So that's blended on top. And similarly, this is the outdoor one. So I made my own outdoor system to adjust contrast, brightness, shadow color, highlight color, and that all gets blended together, saturation as well, and then it goes into there. So this allows me, through material parameter collection, to change the saturation, highlight color, shadow color, brightness, and contrast levels of the game in view, and I'm controlling them through the sky, because at the end of the sky here, it's writing those values here. You can see it's blending between a couple of different values for contrast, brightness, highlights, shadows, and saturation. And this does nothing more but just updating the material parameter collection.